What's up, everybody? Anthony Cosenza coming at you with the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast and on the Cincy Jungle podcast channel, coming at you live on the show a little bit earlier time. We've had a little bit of some scheduling things come up, but we're coming at you a little earlier than usual, at least for the live viewers. And I thank John for moving his schedule around. John Sheeran joining me as usual. We've had another good week on the show, man. So how are you?
Another fantastic week, I would say. I'm doing well. I hope you are doing well. How is the arm for everyone at home?
It's okay. Still braced up. I actually just came from physical therapy a little bit ago. So a little bit of a harder session today for me, but we're getting there, John. We're getting there. We're going to get movement. We're going to get strength. We're getting it back, my friend. I appreciate you asking. It's not been fun. A lot to talk about tonight on our show, which will be more fun than discussing my arm injury as I think it would be more fun to discuss it at least. We've got a recap of the week one win. The Bengals got a win in week one on the road, beating the Super Bowl champs on their home turf. We're going to talk a little bit about that, some takeaways, who impressed, who didn't. And we're going to do a little Believe It or Not. We did that segment a couple of weeks ago, so we'll take some storylines and or narratives, maybe some reaches, and talk about some topics that we believe or maybe not believe based on what we saw after one preseason game. And then we will have a breakout player for you. We will preview a position group. We'll continue that one. And then, of course, we'll talk a tiny bit about the week 2 game and get on out of here. So that's what's on tap. Before we get to that, I want to encourage folks to get the show how you can, whether that's on your favorite audio streamer, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, any of those. We're on all of the major ones. Make sure you subscribe to the Cincy Jungle podcast channel and be notified when we go live, be notified when we have new material for you. And then, of course, that the same notifications can be found by subscribing and clicking the bell on our YouTube channel. So please do that. John, I took the air really late. It was late for me, but really late for some of the live viewers when on Saturday night. I was pretty tired, and Game Pass was a little wonky for me. I tried to power through an entire Bengals game and see what I could see from my vantage point as I relayed some things, and then the dust settled a couple days later. I think I had some different takeaways, different vantage points of some things, but let's kind of talk about your thoughts, your opinions of what we saw in week 1 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as the Bengals went in there down south and beat the Super Bowl champs.
As far as week 1 of preseason, it was pretty damn solid, I think, for not having the starting quarterback out there, for having the starting offense and defense for a combined, 2 drives, 1 drive each. And I believe the first team only had a handful of plays out there or on offense. So having quarterbacks, Brandon Allen for one half, and then Kyle Shermer for another half, still being able to put up 19 points against a defense that was top of the league last year. And I know that most of that defense didn't play for most of the game, but it's still the Buccaneers, and it's still one of the best rosters in the NFL. So presumably the depth of said roster is pretty solid, and they just played with them for the entirety of the game. It was weird at times seeing some of the calls kind of go the other way in favor of the Bengals instead of the home team defending Super Bowl champions at times. But I think some of that kind of may have impacted how some of the drives ended up and gave the Bengals a couple extra points on there. But that's kind of how that goes. Sometimes the pendulum swings the other way, and refereeing in the preseason is always questionable. They're always experimenting with some of the calls and whatnot. So that was, I guess, sort of a minor kind of topic during the game that we were thinking about. But man, some of these players that kind of stepped up that we didn't really talk about, I guess, going into the game or really for much of the offseason, it really surprised me for how well some of these guys played. And that's really what I think we missed about the preseason last year. We hadn't watched one of these games since 2019. The last preseason game Bengals fans saw, it featured Jake Dolegala throwing for 300 yards against the Colts at home. And it was there was some receivers. There was Damian Willis out there. There was another receiver whose name escapes me. That there was, that's the traditional, preseason hype. Some of these younger guys, bottom of the roster guys, fighting for their futures, their livelihood in the NFL, and they're making plays against other backups. And that is kind of what we lost last year when there wasn't a preseason. But to see some of these rookies, some of these unheralded stories, some of these guys that, again, we haven't really discussed or talked about that much because either they weren't doing that much in training camp and the practices, or they just kind of flew under the radar. But they're not under the radar anymore. They are very much here to stay, and they were some of the biggest topics on Saturday.
There were, so when I looked at the stats and I saw some plays, and, you know, when I was watching the game, I kind of was like, yeah, I mean, there's a couple of big, nice runs. Some of them came very late. There were, you know, other times they were having a little trouble getting pushed. But as you started to kind of dive a little further into things, the offensive line play was a little bit better than I think expected, and better than maybe, at least for me, when I looked at it watching the game live. I feel like now looking at some of the PFF scores and going back and seeing some things, there were some good things on tape from some young guys, some guys that have a lot to prove on that offensive line. There were some good runs by running backs that, they were late in the game and they were against guys that may not be on NFL rosters, but they were able to make some plays. You saw the versatility of a guy like Chris Evans. There were some nice catches. Jamar Chase got involved early. So, I mean, there was a lot of things to take away as positive. There was some sloppiness. I mean, 19-14 is a pretty butt ugly score in general in football. But, I mean, there were a lot of things that you can kind of say, you know, for a week one preseason game, and to your point, not having a preseason last year, going in, beating the Super Bowl champs on their home field, and kind of seeing some of the things that we saw was pretty nice. We're showing, if you're watching the video, we're showing the box score courtesy of ESPN of this game. You see Kyle Shermer, 12 of 19, 108 yards, 1 interception. You see Brandon Allen, 7 of 10, 77 yards, 1 interception. I believe the interception with Brandon Allen there was the one that he threw over to Mike Thomas, and it was a pretty poor throw, and the defender got his hand on it. Originally, when I first kind of saw it, I had only seen the play a couple times. It looked like maybe Mike Thomas had a problem fighting for the ball, but it was not really that. It was actually more of a poor throw. The defensive back got in there, got his hand on it, and then Mike Thomas made a really high-effort play to get the ball back for the team. So kind of a wacky one there. And then you look down here, you see 71 yards by Jaquez Patrick. The 24-yarder came late in the game. Chris Evans he had the 2.1 yards per carry, so he had a little bit of issues getting things going there, but he did help out in the pass game. And then P. Ryan had a rough night, 3 carries, 5 yards. So, I mean, there's definitely some areas for improvement. You see Trenton Irwin, we'll talk about him in just a little bit. 3 catches, 35 yards. Evans had the 33 yards on 4 catches. So there are a lot of guys that seem to be ready to be involved in this offense. And a lot of the starters, Higgins, Boyd, even the rookie Chase, look like they're just ready to go from week one in the preseason. You got to like all of that. And then as we go down to defense, what did you see on defense aside from Joseph Osai and some not great news, but better than expected news, I guess, from his play in that game? And then you've got a number of others. Darius Hodge had a great game, and other new faces coming in there and playing well on the defensive side of the ball, John.
I honestly think that was the story. Like, Osai is obviously the headline of the overall performance and the win for how outstanding he was in his first NFL game. It was weird initially seeing Darius Hodge out there as a guy that we just haven't heard of at all during training camp. He was literally arrested back in July for an assault charge from like 2019. He was a player from Marshall. He grew up, I believe, in somewhere in North Carolina. And I guess in 2019, he was home in North Carolina, and there was an assault charge for him 2 years ago. And he was finally arrested for that charge, I guess, literally on July 4th of this year. So I remember writing about that for the site. And thinking, oh, that sucks. He's an undrafted guy. He's now dealing with this. He's probably not going to make the team. We don't hear about him at all during training camp. And there's like 5 minutes into the game. It's like the first drive for the Bengals defense, and he's out there on like third down. Like, oh my God, he's not only playing the game, but he's playing with the starters or like the second team like pass rushing unit. And then he goes on to have like 5 quarterback hits, 2 sacks, including a sack that essentially ended the game. It was like a shoestring sack on rookie quarterback Kyle Trask that gave the Bengals the ball back. They kicked in the field goal, got up by 5, basically all but ended the game. It was out of nowhere. I didn't know that he was still involved in the plans. I didn't know he was this high up in the depth chart. And I mean, that's literally what the preseason is about, though. Like, he's not going to get those opportunities really in training camp. There's no mock game where he can kind of make that impression. It's going up against another team's offensive line. And it's opportunities like that he has to take advantage of if he wants to make the team. And he certainly did. And I guess he kind of got more snaps because of Joseph Osai's injury that happened on a play where both Osai and Hodge basically met at, I want to say that was Trask back there for the Buccaneers, the quarterback, but they met back there in the backfield. And unfortunately, Osai's wrist kind of got hit in the wrong way. But I think that is also like a talking point that kind of started with Osai. He played fantastic. Like, there's no way to, maneuver around that point. He was fantastic as a pass rusher. He was winning in a multitude of ways, and he was honestly even better as a run defender. I believe he was PFF's highest graded run defender for the Bengals. He had like 3 defensive stops to his name. So he was going 110% for 2.5 quarters and was playing into the third quarter. And I believe Zach Taylor said that the plan was for him and Cam Sample, who, to his credit, had a really good game as well. The plan was to have both of those guys play the entirety of the game, which makes sense. They're both 3rd, 4th round picks, respectively. They're going to be, rotational guys when in the regular season when they make the team. They need all the reps they can have. Joseph Osai, I think, has literally 12 games on his resume as a true edge rusher. He's 21 years old. He came in here raw. Like, that was the main thing with him. He's hustle, he's athleticism, but he doesn't really know what he's doing yet, and he needs all the reps possible. And he was going to get all the reps possible. But as the game went on, there was this thinking of, Osai is playing fantastic. Is it wise for them to take him out of the game at this point to prevent injury? And they left him back, and they left him in there. He unfortunately did something to his wrist. We don't know when he's coming back. But I guess my whole thing was that, yeah, you leave him in there because he needs the reps. You don't worry about a guy who is not a starter, who is not going to play, well over 50% of your defensive snaps. You're not worried about that guy getting injured, especially if he's young and if he needs the reps. To me, it was just more of an unfortunate thing that if you're trying to discuss it, you're only basically using it in hindsight. And I understand that there is a role for him to carve out and for him to be really important in the defense. But at the end of the day, that's his first game out there. And regardless of how great he was, he still really needed his reps. And to me, it was just kind of an unfortunate thing that may have just happened. But I don't really know how you can look at that and say, yeah, he should have been out of the game earlier. Again, 3rd round pick, a guy who's a rotational guy right now, and he needs those reps. And it's unfortunate he's going to miss some of these reps in the next couple weeks now.
It does sound, based on reports, that it's not an overly serious wrist injury. Maybe there's I don't want to speculate, but maybe there's a hairline fracture or some sort of issue there. But it sounds like he's going to be ready for week 1 in some capacity. We don't know how big of one, but I don't think we'll see him again this preseason, which is one of those double-edged swords. It's nice so you can heal up and be ready for when the games count, but it's also would be nice for a guy that is viewed as, even as explosive and great as he looked, he still is looked at as a guy that needs a little work, needs reps, and needs to fine tune some things. That's why he fell to the 3rd round. But man, the sky looks to be the limit for that kid. And, I really liked what I saw from him. Hodge played very well. And really, some other folks have said it here. The defensive line in general played well. Hendrickson was in on the sack with Osai at the beginning of the game. Mike Daniels had some nice plays later in the game. DJ Reader had a pressure early in the game and had a high PFF grade on just a handful of snaps. So, you gotta like what we're seeing from the defensive line, which has really been kind of something that has been, I guess, a little bit of a weakness for the team, particularly last year with all the injuries.
100% it's been a weakness for the last couple of years. And part of that was because they just haven't had enough competent bodies out there because of injuries. But now you're looking at a post Geno Atkins, Carlos Dunlap reality where you have new leaders in there. You have a lot of investment, a lot of money in there. You have multiple free agents and draft picks over the last couple of years. It really does feel like this is the culmination of all of the work that Anarumo and the front office has done to reshape and rebuild that entire unit. And it was great to see Osai kind of like spearheading the effort and the production there. But it definitely wasn't just him. It was obviously Hodge. There was, I think Cam Sample had 4 total pressures, including a sack on the very last play. DJ Reader, he only played like 4 snaps, but one of them was a pressure that I think he hit Tom Brady right after Brady threw a deep incompletion down the left sideline. He got in there, his first game back since last October. Sam Hubbard played, a handful of snaps, but he's out there. Trey Hendrickson had half a sack on. He was the one who sacked Brady along with Osai. And there was a lot of permutations and combinations of pass rushing groupings that we saw out there. I think on the first third down, you had Sample and Hubbard lined up inside with Hendrickson and Osai on the outside. I think if Osai is healthy for week 1 or early in the regular season, that's the grouping that you're probably going to see on second and longs and third downs in general. So it was nice to get a glimpse into what their plans are now. It was also interesting to me, at least, Josh Tupou got the start for Larry Ogunjobi, who wasn't going to play because he just returned to the practice field a few days prior. So he was starting next to DJ Reader at defensive tackle, which allowed Tyler Shelvin, the rookie out of LSU, to kind of come in behind Reader and be the second team nose tackle. So that kind of gives us an idea of where they are with the defensive tackle rotation. It kind of tells us that Tupou is essentially a lock to make this roster if he's battling or if he was battling with Renell Wren. So that gives us a glimpse at that. Mike Daniels played, I think, well into the second unit, and they also had a bunch of different groupings with 3 defensive tackles. So you had Reader and Tupou and Daniels out there, and then you had Shelvin and I believe like Renell Wren, Freedom, Akim Mullenham behind them. So we got a good glimpse of what the rotation is, the defensive line. But a lot of these guys are healthy, and they honestly do look a lot better in this new scheme. So early returns on Inarumo's vision for the pass rush, nothing but positive so far.
And a lot of size in that combination between DJ Reader and Josh Tupou lining up there. I mean, it's a lot of size. So, and before we get to our believe it or not on some of these storylines and narratives coming from this game, we would be remiss if we didn't even mention the special teams units, John. On punt returns here, on kick returns, Phillips had a 40-yard return, a nice 40-yard return. Trent Taylor, 2 returns for 38 total yards. Not a great night for him there, but punt returns, Irwin had just a nice night. The 3 catches for 30-plus yards I mentioned earlier, a 13-yard punt return. Taylor did have a 9-yard punt return. Phillips only a 2-yard return. But then the kicking, right? The kicking game is looking strong. Bengals kickers were 4 of 4. McPherson, the rookie, and Austin Seibert, 2 of 2 apiece. And, hitting them into the high 30s. And you see there, Evan McPherson, his long was a 40-yarder. And then you've got an extra point from Austin Seibert there. So 13 total points and a perfect night from the kickers, John. Kevin Huber, you see there, 47.3 yard average on his punts. One of them was a 58-yarder. So things are looking pretty strong on the special teams unit too.
Evan McPherson's first kick, I believe, cleared the net from 40 out, which is bonkers. I don't know if it feels it's such a rookie thing to do in my mind. He's obviously nervous. It's his first kick in an NFL game. He just wants to boom it because he's got the leg power. And I don't know. I feel like that's not normally what happens, even with kickers who have notoriously strong legs. Like Matt Prater out is not always clearing the net from 42 because he's trying to be accurate more than powerful. He knows he has enough leg. I feel like that was just McPherson's nerves kind of getting to him. So I'm just going to boom this and see where it goes. Right. But it was right down the middle and it cleared the net by 10 feet. So it probably would have been good from 80 or something like that. So that was fun to see. It's fun to see this battle kind of go the opposite way of what the battle from 4 years ago went. And, credit to Seibert. He's doing all he can to at least look good. But right now, it kind of feels like he's filling out his resume for his next employer. But also, just on the subject of preseason shenanigans, we mentioned earlier the Mike Thomas forced fumble, I guess in quotation marks. That was the first of 3 or 4 wacky turnovers in this game. There were a handful of weird fumbles on the Bengals side. I believe Thomas fumbled. There was that fumble for Thomas on in the red zone on the drive after that or whatever. But it was that weird phantom forced fumble from the Buccaneers defender who got Brandon Allen's interception. And then there were 2 interceptions for the Bengals defense, both caused by backup slot cornerback Jalen Davis, who probably has a lock to make the roster as the 6th cornerback now. Both tipped up in the air. First one was hauled in by, I believe, Kayvon Frazier, and the second one was hauled in by Trayvon Henderson. It was like, this is the epitome of preseason. Balls flying everywhere. Turnover 7 in this game. Honestly, made me realize how much I missed the preseason and some of these shenanigans that happen with these backups.
One other thing that we just didn't mention were those cornerbacks and Bengals defensive backs, I believe, had 6 passes defended, 2 interceptions. So, I mean, I know that wasn't against Brady, but, hey, they're making plays back there, and all of this is revamped under Lou Anarumo. We are going to get to another segment. Obviously, there's a lot of talking points now based on what we've seen from this game. What we think we know after just one game. There's a lot of chatter. There's a lot of potential storylines, I guess, that we could talk about. So let's have some fun. We've done this once. We got a pretty good response from our listeners. We're going to do it again. This is a segment called Believe It or Not, and let's get to it. So if you missed it the first time, what we are going to do, we're going to kind of give some storylines. I've got some. I think John's got some as well. We'll kind of ask each other a little bit of some of these narratives and storylines that either fans have come up with based on what we saw, writers, or some of the just in general observations with the team, particularly what we saw in week 1. So, John, here's something I want to start with, because everybody's talking about the offensive line. A lot of people believe that I was a little too harsh on them at first reaction in the post-game show. So let's talk a little Deontay Smith. A couple weeks ago, Jake Liskow from Locked On Bengals came on our Listener Questions Live, and we had a fun chat with him. This guy is one of Jake's favorite players in the Bengals 21 draft class. He was one of mine as well, just because I think there's a bright future. But I think we all thought this guy has a somewhat big hill to climb to be a viable NFL starter. We're maybe looking at 22, maybe 23, where he takes over as the right tackle. All of a sudden, he's playing well at guard. He got second team reps. He got starter reps this week in practice. And there was a big blown block at left tackle by him that caused a fumble on a run play. But otherwise, he had a solid PFF score in this game. So I guess, believe it or not, John, do you think that Deontay Smith is ready to start or will start at some point this year on the Bengals offensive line?
I think if he starts, it'll be because of injury. I'm not ready to say he's going to be out there week 1 at one of the guard spots. I think he's playing himself into being the first guard off the bench, definitely playing himself to be active on game days. But I think if he does end up starting, it'll be because someone in front of him stinks or someone in front of him is injured. It's just, the whole thing is weird to me. He has a terrible practice at right tackle. He's beaten by a drum by Sam Hubbard for like 40 minutes or something. And they basically say, all right, you're done. You're moving inside the guard, not just guard, but left guard. I mean, spot that presumably is held down by Quinn Spain, who is projected to start. So he's just a backup. He's, second or third team, whatever, left guard. Does well in practice at that new spot. He basically is, I guess, promoted to second team left guard. Now he's out there in the preseason and with the second team, and he's playing like the best offensive lineman on the field. Now, granted, it's the Bengals' second team offensive line, so your competition's not too fierce. But again, production's production. Quality tape is quality tape. He's done everything right basically this entire offseason. He has a couple bad practices at tackle, and then they basically transform him to guard. So I can't really explain it. It's not something that either of us could, it's not something that any one of us could have predicted. I think it just kind of happened to be what it was when he arrived in camp at whatever weight that he is now. He's just playing like a guy who committed this offseason to basically reshaping, getting back up to a strong and sturdy playing weight. But all the tools, all the size, all the athleticism that you could possibly want for an offensive lineman that could play at any position, I just don't know if they're going to trust him at the very least early on the season to play significant snaps. But unfortunately, injuries happen with this Bengals team, with this staff. Unfortunately, a lot of shakeups along the offensive line happen. So I'm definitely not counting him out to play sometime this year, but I think it's still a little bit too early to say this guy's going to be a starter year one.
Yeah, I don't know that he's going to win a starting job, especially in, after one preseason game or two or three preseason games, even if he continues to play well, practice well. The good news is he's showing improvement. The other good news is he's playing in a lot of different spots and showing some good things at those different spots. I always just was like, hey, this is the right tackle of the future. Groom that guy to take over for Riley Reif, whether that's next year or the year after. I didn't really think guard was in the works for him because he has that nice arm length, some of the, one of the longer arms in the draft. He's got the athleticism that you would look for as a project tackle, but he's a guy that they feel could play guard, and he's doing it pretty well. He's kind of a guy that I really liked a long time ago. If you want to kind of harken back a little bit, I remember a guy, Anthony Collins, on the Bengals, who played both tackle spots. Tried him at guard a little bit. It was kind of iffy at guard, but a guy that just had a lot of athleticism and a lot of skill. And he was able to play some spots, start some games for him. I think this kid has more upside and can do some more things even in this short period of time. I'm excited about him. I don't think he's going to start right away. I think if, like you said, it may force an injury, maybe some inefficient play at one of these spots that forces him to come in and start. But, I like what I've seen so far. And just going back to the PFF grade, 84.8 pass blocking grade, John, in this game with 16 snaps and pass protection. So, a limited sample size, granted. And there was the one big gaffe at left tackle in the run game miss, the run block that he missed. But I like what I saw. I liked what I saw from him for sure.
And just real quick, this question would be easier to answer, I think, if he was playing right guard and if he was in that battle. It's just weird how he looks like far and away their best interior offensive lineman right now, including like everyone at center right now, because we haven't seen Trey Hopkins. It would be easier to make a declaration that he is going to eventually start if he was dealing with the guys at right guard who are struggling right now, but he's not for some reason. They put him at left guard. And again, we have to assume that there's a level of confidence that Quinton Spain is going to be fine and he's going to start. That's the position that Spain himself has said he's most comfortable at. So you're putting this guy that has a decent amount of promise, and he's definitely proving that, behind him. So there's not a lot of room for him to grow, at least at that spot. If he was at right guard with everyone else, you would have to say that he definitely has the advantage over these guys who just aren't necessarily taking advantage of their opportunity, aside from a guy in Mike Jordan, who we still don't know for sure has really taken that next step.
Right guard's still the biggest question mark on this team at this point in time. Obviously, some things to sort out at center with Trey Hopkins and whatnot too. But some question marks there. Do you want me to keep peppering you with some questions, or you got one for me? What do you want here?
I'll throw it back to you, man. Throw it back to you.
Okay. So let's I'm debating if I want to keep let's keep it on the offensive line. Let's keep it on the offensive line. Okay. So the other talking point is Michael Jordan. And Michael Jordan was out there, and there were, a little bit of ups and downs, but for him, a pretty clean game. 0 sacks across the board for the offensive line. I believe Mike Jordan had allowed 0 pressures in the game, if I remember correctly. And he was just behind Deontay Smith in terms of PFF score with a pass blocking grade of 80. If you remember, Mike Jordan, yes, he struggled in the run game too, but his pass blocking has been something that has left a lot to be desired. One game, but we've heard about his offseason transition. We've heard about all this stuff. Do you believe that Michael Jordan is turning a corner, has turned a corner based on the things he's done now under the coaching of Frank Pollock? Do you think that this kid's going to turn a corner and actually be a viable starter for this team?
You know how Tom Cruise runs in action movies? He's really long strides. So when he makes a 90-degree turn, it takes forever to do because he's kind of running really uptight. Michael Jordan is a few steps into that elongated Tom Cruise turn. He is, in fact, I think, turning a corner, but it's so damn early to think that he's actually making sustainable progress that will last over the course of not only an entire season, but I guess even an entire month. We've heard all good things about everything that he's done this offseason, and I'm willing to believe that a lot of that has weight. It still remains to be seen. And I think that their actions or inactions in terms of committing him to be a starter, it kind of says something along those lines. Like even today on Wednesday, like it was Xavier Su'a-Filo taking the starting reps at right guard over him. So they're not yet committed to him, taking this competition by the reins and kind of running with it. They're still giving other guys a chance. I think at the very least, they're still holding out a glimpse of hope for Jackson Carman to kind of beat him out. But so far, he has done everything that you could possibly want from him based off where he was when we last saw him. I think he's taken everything that's happened in the last 9 months extremely personal, right to the heart. At the end of the day, this is a 4th-round pick who's in the 3rd year of his contract. He's unfortunately very expendable. He just happens to have this inherent value because they need as many bodies along the offense line as possible. But from the very beginning, he was always this moldable, athletic ball of clay that unfortunately was coached for 2 years by one of the worst position coaches in NFL history. And now he has one of the best offensive line coaches in the game today who seems to have an impression or have made an impression on essentially every offensive lineman in that room. And I suppose there has been some progress in that regard with Jordan as well. Is he making progress? Yes. Has he turned a corner yet? I don't know. And I don't think we're going to know until well into the regular season.
I agree with you. I can't disagree with what you said there. But to your point, John, this is the year. Mike Jordan was drafted. He was very, very young. I think he was just 21, if I remember correctly, when he was drafted. He was very young. He was the youngest player on the roster that year in 2019 when they drafted him. This is the year that he has to do it. And if it's not going to be this year, this experiment is done. And I liked the pick when the pick was made because I thought, like you said, that phrase you said about a lot of clay to mold there. And I think there is between his size and athleticism and all that kind of stuff. But the problem is it's just not translating on the field. Poor coaching, youth, all that kind of stuff, a combination of issues have contributed to that. But this is the time now. It's good that we're seeing the things. Where I'm real hesitant here, though, John, is, I think he only had, 8 snaps in this game. So nice pass blocking grade. I like it. But on only 8 snaps in the game, you got to do this on a more consistent basis. You got to do it against more top-level competition. I like what I've seen so far. Not really ready to say, hey, Mike Jordan, the job's yours. Do you want to go next? Do you want me to keep peppering you?
I'll go next. We'll stay on the offensive side of the ball. We'll go beyond the offensive line. We'll go to the receivers room now. Okay. The leading receiver of Saturday's game, it was not Mike Thomas. It was not Auden Tate. It was not even offseason darling Trent Taylor. It was Trenton Irwin, who had maybe one of the biggest highlights on offense, catching the ball over the middle and taking the crown of a helmet right to his sternum. I think he even drew a flag on that play. He had 3 receptions for 35 yards. But beyond Saturday night, he has shown up in basically every training camp practice. It seems like every day, Bengals.com or some beat reporter is posting a video of him at practice beating one-on-one coverage and making an impressive catch for a guy of his appearance in the red zone drill. So he looks to be doing everything in his power to make this roster. But on the depth chart, he's still, I guess, technically the 3rd slot receiver. So does Trenton Irwin have a legitimate chance of making this team, or is the battle really over at this point? It's just a matter of if they keep 7, including Irwin.
Every year, the Cincinnati Bengals seem to have some undrafted or back-end roster guy that's maybe floated on and off their roster for the better part of a year, 2 years, that ends up doing all kinds of crazy things in a preseason game, and oftentimes it gets them on the roster. Damian Willis started a couple of years ago. I was at the game in Seattle. He started week 1, and he was a guy that was an undrafted guy that worked his way up because of a great preseason, great practices, and they had faith in him. Now, you mentioned that Irwin was way down the depth chart. Trent Taylor's been kind of the darling through spring and summer. Now, all of a sudden, Irwin's making highlight one-handed catches in practice. He led the team with the 30-plus receiving yards. He had the nice punt return, by the way. That's a job that Trent Taylor needs to be able to shine at to make the roster. I'm not so sure that Trent Taylor is safe. The Bengals just waived 2 wide receivers, Riley Lees, and I can't remember the other one offhand right now, but they just waived 2 wide receivers this week. So along with Pro Wells, the tight end. So they obviously like what they're seeing from a guy like Irwin. I think he's got a legitimate shot to make the roster based on just this game and what we've seen in recent practices, and the fact that the Bengals seem to find these little diamonds in the rough in the preseason that end up shining in these games. So no, these guys didn't have that opportunity last year, and Irwin seems to be taking it and running with it.
I do think he essentially now has made the roster. I don't think that the fact that he's listed as a slot behind two other slots is going to necessarily impact it. He's just making too many plays. And this is a guy who's been on the practice squad since 2019, like late 2019. He's only appeared in like maybe one or two games, but you just kind of love those stories. Like Trey Hopkins was a very similar story. Another undrafted guy who battled on the practice squad. Unfortunately, Hopkins had a lot of injury issues, but just kept practicing, kept grinding, and eventually cracked into the starting lineup and made the team consistently. I think that is not necessarily the path that Irwin's going to go. I don't think he's ever going to be a starter, but I think he's just doing too much positive things to be turned down for some of these other receivers. Unfortunately, I'm not sure that we can say the same of Travion Williams, which is where we're going to go next. Unfortunately, he was injured, I believe, last Thursday with a hamstring injury. He did not make the trip to Tampa Bay. And that is another nature of the preseason. Some of these guys who are maybe higher on the depth chart, they get injured, they get dinged up. It opens the door for other guys below them to kind of make an impression. And that's certainly what Jacques Patrick and Chris Evans did in the preseason game on Saturday. And Trayvon Williams could only watch home in Cincinnati and to see potentially his job be turned away. I don't think that Williams, he is not going to play on Friday. He remains out with a hamstring injury. So this is really the end of the road for the 6th round.
I think there are a lot of keys here. The biggest key, John, he was a Jim Turner guy. He played at A&M when Jim Turner was there, and Jim Turner vouched for him. They took the late round pick on him because Jim Turner felt that he would jive well with what he was trying to do on the offensive line. I'm sure he pounded the table for him. And the Bengals believed that he could be a back-end guy on that running back group that can help him out. He had, in early parts of practice, he had a couple of nice showings. I think in that scrimmage, he had a couple of nice plays. Our friend Daddio has some nice footage of that, couple nice plays by Travion Williams. But when this staff brings in a Chris Evans, drafts a guy that also has very high-end receiving talent, Apuka Williams, who, made some splashes in practice and whatnot. And then you've got Jacques Patrick showing off in this game as well. All of a sudden, a guy who was in the previous regime in terms of an offensive line coach and the connection there, that's been severed. I don't know that there's room for him. I think they want to have these versatile guys who can be guys that line up a slot, be guys that can be counted on a regular basis to catch footballs out of the backfield and also provide that spark in the run game. Not saying Travion can't do that, but one of the best abilities you have is availability, and he hasn't been available, and his coach that likely vouched for him when they drafted him is not here.
That is an unfortunate aspect for him. Still, I think there is some support for him in the building. Zach Taylor is also somewhat of a Texas A&M guy, so I think he has been familiar with him since his college days, and it's just the guys in front of him, man, like Patrick and Evans, like they can do everything that Williams can do, but honestly, a little bit better. It was nice to see Williams make some plays in the limited reps that he had last year, but this truly feels like it's a non-personal issue. It's not you, it's just the other guys that are unfortunately getting more reps and are making more of an impact. So, in all likelihood, he's a 6th round pick that hasn't really done anything 3 years into the league. It's very possible that, they can waive him and pick him back up on the practice squad and keep him around in case some other injuries happen. But it just feels like that injury came at the worst possible time. And Jacques Patrick has kind of been waiting for this opportunity to shine. And it really does feel like that 4th running back job is his to lose right now.
Yeah, Patrick was a guy that probably would have enjoyed having a preseason last year because that was how he was going to be able to show off, and unfortunately just was not able to do that. So, but the good news is whether it's Williams or these other players, I mean, the running back group looks pretty talented even without Gio Bernard in the mix there. They look like they've got a good stable of young, athletic, versatile running backs. So good stuff. We focused on the offense for this, believe it or not, segment. And we're going a little long, and we want to get to a couple of other segments. Maybe we'll add in some more defense next time, but a fun, believe it or not, segment there, focusing on the offense. A lot of questions there, and we'll undoubtedly keep talking about all kinds of different things, especially after the Bengals take on the Washington football team this week. John, you, sir, have a positional preview that you'd like to spearhead, and what group we focusing on this week?
So we had some talk about Deontay Smith, Michael Jordan, Jackson Carman a little bit. So why don't we just stick on that page of the playbook and talk about the offensive guards a little bit?
Okay, let's do it.
So right now, again, it's just a lot of unknowns, I guess. The only known, I suppose, is that Quinton Spain is favored to win the left guard battle. If you can even call it a battle right now, I think it's kind of leaning that way. Like, but at the same time, it just feels like they're just giving Smith a lot of reps and a lot of opportunity to kind of see what he is at this new position. Other than that, no one knows a damn thing. And we've kind of put off talking about the offensive line in general until August and, closer to the season, just in case that they do anything to this position group, in case they added someone off the street, in case injuries happen, because the longer that we took to talk about this, hopefully the more clear the picture would be. That's why we talked about some of the other less controversial positions, I guess, on the team, because we had a greater idea about what it is. We still don't really know what offensive guard is right now. We know the depth chart says Spain is starting. Michael Jordan is technically starting at right guard. Other than that, it's a gigantic mystery. And they've said repeatedly over the last week or so that this is probably going to last until the beginning of the season, and they're going to give everyone a chance. It doesn't really feel like they're giving everyone a chance, though. It just kind of feels like they're giving 4 guys a chance, and they're trying to light a spark under Jackson Carman's butt right now. And that's unfortunate because he's a second-round pick, and he was touted to be one of the favorites to win that job, but it just hasn't, I guess, clicked. Now, in terms of just looking at this from a draft perspective and exiting the draft, we thought that Carman was going to get the reps to be the starter right guard. Deontay Smith was going to be, like you mentioned, just a reserve for now, a guy who's going to try to put on weight, but then worry about him in 2022. It kind of feels like that's flipped now. It kind of feels like Carman is the guy who we don't know who he is yet, and he needs to worry about his own personal self and really get his mind right to adapt to NFL life. And now Deontay Smith is out there being a favorite to win one of these jobs, and he's taken this offseason, really hard, and he's basically worked his butt off to be where he is. So it kind of feels like it's just flipped, and that's the danger of kind of analyzing the draft right after the draft happens, because we don't know as much as we think we know right after it happens. So if that's the way it is, if Deontay Smith is this immediate, I guess, quote unquote, immediate answer at guard, and Carman just needs a year to figure things out, then I suppose it's just a net wash. But other than that, it seems like they're just relying on some of these old names in hopes that they perform better under a new offensive line coach. Essentially, if you think about it and talk about it enough, it kind of just makes you wonder, why did they not kind of address this more in free agency?
And it goes back to our conversation a week ago with the Jesse Bates news. If you weren't going to be comfortable paying Jesse Bates a large sum of money, I mean, you can't foresee some of these contracts, I guess, if you're an NFL front office. But if you were sitting there in free agency as the Cincinnati Bengals, you've got things to fix on the offensive line. You've got a premier player to pay in Jesse Bates. If it was going to be one or the other, you better have committed one way or the other. Right now, Jesse Bates and the Bengals seem to be at odds in terms of a contract extension by all reports. And the Bengals really don't have a true solution at right guard, and some other stopgap solutions at left guard, right tackle, etc. Now, the fascinating thing to me about this position group, by the way, for those checking out the video, we have the guard group up. The Cincinnati Bengals on their website have, alphabetically, they have players listed as G for guard, and then there's one player listed as OG, and that's Quinton Spain. So he's not in the picture, but he's within the group there, I promise. Unfortunately, just the way that it's categorized there, in case you're wondering, where's Quinton Spain? The fascinating thing to me here, John, in this position group is the whole, and we're not really talking about it a lot, but the whole Trey Hopkins, Billy Price situation. Billy Price has stepped in as Trey Hopkins is coming back from that knee injury, got some starter reps and done some different things in practice, still looking like he has some issues to iron out at center. But there's a kind of some theories of, hey, what about Trey Hopkins coming in and playing guard? He was a guard for this team as well as a center. They kind of made him a center because he was capable, and it was an absolute necessity because Billy Price wasn't working out for the prior years. I guess I'm just kind of wondering if there's some sort of scenario where Xavier Su'a-Filo is not inspiring much confidence. Neither is Jackson Carman. He's not ready. Deontay Smith, they still feel he's raw. If they wanted to move him to the right side, we know Fred Johnson was not a good option at offensive guard in his start against Cleveland in week 2 last year. Is this a situation where we maybe see Trey Hopkins and Billy Price in some capacity there?
I'm not sure if we're quite ready for that. And part of it, I think, is because Trey Hopkins is only practicing. He's not playing right now, but he's practicing at center. It's where he's taking his reps. I know he's a veteran and he's played essentially every position on this offensive line, whether it's in training camp or preseason. But I just feel like he truly did find a home at center. Under Frank Pollock originally. That was the first position coach that played him at center, and he shined in 2018 when Billy Price was hurt. And then they realized that is where he should probably stay. And it just kind of sucks that we're even having this conversation. Like they can't solve this other issue. So they're having to move a good player at this position that he seems to be natural at back to this other position where he clearly didn't last. And like he performed decently at right guard, I want to say a few years ago, but he obviously didn't become a long-term solution, and they didn't seem interested in keeping him at that position going forward beyond like 2016 or 2017. So I do think Hopkins stays at center, and they just try to make something work at right guard. But also, we're kind of taking like a pessimistic angle at this because it's a lot of unknowns. But for the most part, or maybe not for the most part, there at least are some positives. Like Jordan did play well against the Buccaneers. We have to give him that. 8 snaps or not, he did play well in his 8 snaps. Like even Jackson Carman, like the guy didn't necessarily like look like the old Michael Jordan out there. He still had some good reps. I know the first one ended in the holding, but I mean, you love to see the guy on his first snap bury his defender into the dirt, get a pancake on the unofficial box score. Like for them, I think Carman had a handful of good reps that you could say this is good. This is a good job. This is a reflection of natural talent, natural strength. Like the tools are there for Carman. It's not like he played terrible against the Bucs. It's everything else. Like apparently he's just not doing what he needs to do during practice or whatever. And they're trying to maybe, I guess, nail that into him with a third string designation. But it's not like he's a total bust just yet or anything close to that right now. And at the end of the day, if you have to start Su'a-Filo at right guard, there are some worse options, I guess. It's tough. Like, there's not a lot of great, fantastic guards in the NFL. So the prospect of Su'a-Filo out there, it doesn't seem that enticing. But, he still played decently at times when he was healthy last year. So if you have to start him because you're not confident in the others, there are worse situations. And I think there are worse scenarios where you would have to move Hopkins out of center for that.
Yeah, I suppose I agree with you. I think no matter, unless the Bengals make some sort of significant move that surprises us all over the next couple of weeks, whether that's someone that's out there on a surprise final cut and they're able to get kind of a starting caliber guy that is above some of the guys that they've been trotting out there. Mike Jordan continues to turn that corner, or Jackson Carman starts to get some of the things at the pro level that they want to see out of him, namely consistency. And, there's some other things that they're talking about with some issues there. But I don't think we're going to be week 1 fully comfortable, whoever's starting there at this point. I mean, I don't think we're going to I don't think we're going to be sitting there week 1 going, hey, we're stoked on what the right guard situation looks like, unless these guys continue to just blow up the preseason, play very well. And then it's kind of a, pick and choose. And I mean, that'd be a good scenario to be in, but I just don't really foresee it. I guess right now, I think we talked about this on our listener questions. Right now, I guess I would see Su'a-Filo being the starter. And, it just kind of seems to maybe get a little bit of that veteran presence. And then if there are issues, maybe they rely on a Carman to come in, or Mike Jordan, because he's also a veteran now at this point. That's kind of how I see things playing out. But I mean, I don't know how many guards they're going to keep. I don't know. There's just a lot of things in flux. And with no one really running away with this competition, it's hard to kind of gauge exactly what they're going to do here. I don't know if you have thoughts on who you think is going to start at this point in time after the preseason game now, but I'm still inclined to think they would go with a veteran, the veteran presence for a little more stability early in the season.
Yeah, I think unless Jordan kind of builds off last Saturday and looks monumentally improved over the next 2 games and just looks like the solution, I think they'll end up going to Suafilo as long as he doesn't also tank his opportunities. It just doesn't seem like Harmon's just ready yet, and that's fine. Like, there's a whole discussion with looking at this from a draft perspective and going back a few months and with the whole conversation with that. But that's a story for another show when we have more time to discuss it. I think it will be Spain and Suafilo with the caveat of Jordan not, I guess, like completely looking like a completely different player necessarily. Like, he's still going to get the opportunities to do so. It's just, I guess, safer to bet on Suafilo making more of it and being slightly more consistent with that. And as far as who makes the team, like, I think Jay Morrison of the Athletic was implying that Suafilo is on the cutting room floor or like in danger of getting cut,
Yeah.
which just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Like, financially, he obviously costs more, and if he's not starting, then he's a very expensive, I guess, backup. And they're not going to cut Carmen, and they're not going to cut Smith, and they're not going to cut Spain. So you're thinking if they go with 4, like, it has to be Suafilo who gets cut. But if you cut him, you're cutting, I guess, your barely most stable option at one of those spots. So I just don't really foresee that right now unless something disastrous happens with him and he looks like he completely forgot how to play football. So I would say 5 make it, like all 5 that are in the discussion right now, which may impact how many tackles they keep. It may impact if they go 9 or 10. It may push them to keep a total of 10, and it may be like a guy like Harmon just doesn't dress on Sundays. So I think right now 5, unless something substantial happens with Jordan really improving and Suafilo really sneaking it up, or vice versa.
Man, your second round offensive lineman not dressing, that would be less than ideal. Ceiling Cat in our live YouTube chat says Suafilo looks like a backup. He was playing at the end of game 1. The problem with that, John, is a lot of the options there at the position look like a backup. There's not a lot of true high-end starting caliber showings at that position. So, maybe to your point, if they feel a guy like Jordan can be a guy that could play both guard spots, maybe they hang on to him. Maybe Suafilo, who, by the way, was also a guy that was brought in with Jim Turner. If they're looking to sever all those ties there and make this a true Frank Pollock line, maybe that's where he gets the axe there. But I don't know, man. That's an interesting theory there in terms of Suafilo getting cut.
But to that point, because he was playing out there in late in the game, I don't think that's necessarily an indictment on where Suafilo is on the depth chart. I think it's more of, I think Paul Dehner Jr. mentioned this, like, they have a better idea of who Suafilo is right now, that they don't necessarily need to see him against the first and second string team against the Bucs. They would rather see how Jordan and Carmen handle those reps compared to Suafilo. I don't think that his job is in jeopardy as much as what him being out there at late in the game would have it seem. Now, if that stays consistent throughout the preseason, and again, Jordan continues to improve, then there's a discussion to be had with that. But I don't think Suafilo is necessarily in as much danger as that would indicate it.
Stuart Monty hurting us all here with the Frank Ragnow mention. We just had to go with the Frank Ragnow mention, huh? Still love you though, Stuart. That's you're just bringing up painful memories, my man. Chris B, just quickly before we move on to a potential breakout player, any chance they move Riley Reif to right guard and start Johnson at tackle? I do not think so. I think Riley Reif is here to be a right tackle, and that is that. It's just a matter of where Fred Johnson fits into those plans. At least that's my take on it.
Yeah, they're not moving Reif to right guard. And I guess just real quick, just to address the Carmen whole thing, like, there was news with Tevin Jenkins having back surgery, missing potentially his entire rookie season. Liam Eichenberg is injured right now with the Dolphins. I guess Sam Cosmi is playing well for the Washington football team. There's a lot of hindsight analysis that you can do with the draft. My advice would be to not do it 5 months after the draft actually happens. The whole thing is like the draft should be, you address needs for the long term. Now, guard was a need for the long term and also for right now, which really means that the discussion shouldn't have been which guard or which offensive lineman do they draft in the first 2 rounds. It's why was this not solved earlier, so it didn't have to be solved in the draft. And then there was the whole dialogue of, oh, they can just draft a guy in the second round and he can start and be average. That's the best case scenario. And that's obviously what you talk about when you discuss these plans, because you're always thinking that everything is going to go right. But not everything always does go right. And specifically with offensive linemen, it is a rarity for these guys to play at least at an average or above average level. For the most part, it doesn't really matter what they do as rookies because they're not really that good yet. And it kind of does take them a year. And again, if Smith becomes the guy who is immediately ready to contribute at one of the spots, and it's Carman who needs a year to kind of figure out his body and figure out what he's doing, then I guess that's why you draft multiple linemen. It's why you take multiple chances. You throw multiple darts at the dartboard to see what sticks. But that's just my thoughts on that conversation, because I know it kind of came up a little bit with the Jenkins news.
Yeah, good point. Good point. We've got a few more minutes, and we're going a little long, but we're getting to a bunch. So we're going to get to a potential breakout player. We're going to give some brief thoughts on the week 2 game coming up, and then we are going to bounce on out of here. So we are going to get to a potential breakout player. We haven't done this. We did one last week, but we took a little break from it at some point, and so we got another one for you here. Who you got for us this week, John? We had Darius Phillips last week, and I think I mentioned him as a more, just kind of, back-end defensive player and quarterback, but a guy that could help out on special teams, and he, lo and behold, made me look like a genius with that 40-yard in there. But who do you have for us this week?
I guess we're going to stick with the offense and make this an offensive show.
Okay.
Just to keep it quick, because we're running low on time here. Chris Evans, the running back, I know it's kind of lazy because he's number 25, but that first run, it was like a 3rd and 1, and he turned it into a 6-yard game. I immediately, without hesitation, thought that is rookie Giovanni Bernard. That is the exact burst, elusiveness that I saw from a 20-year-old Giovanni Bernard at the time when he was a rookie here. It was something that the Bengals offense at the time lacked for, it seemed like, a decade since Corey Dillon or Reed Johnson left. It was something that they wanted to add that offseason, and they immediately found out that they had it. And I remember specifically with Bernard, he made numerous plays like that where he just broke tackles very seamlessly, very quickly, and it was a burst of energy that they had not had. Giovanni Bernard kind of evolved over time into less of a ball carrier, more of a pass protector, and more of a pass catcher, and his role kind of diminished. And then they immediately replaced him with a guy who looks like the old version, or I guess the younger version of Gio and Chris Evans. Now, the box score from Saturday wasn't pretty. 25 yards on 12 carries. I think like 24 of those yards came after contact. And I think he got some criticism from offensive coordinator Brian Callahan saying he had most of the offensive negative plays. And it was interesting to see Evans be so genuine in the post-game press conference. Like, he was all wide-eyed, and all these guys look so much bigger than the guys I played in Michigan. And I guess it's just being a rookie in the preseason. You kind of realize that this is the next level, and some of these guys are a lot bigger and faster than what you played in college. So I hope that he kind of takes that lesson to heart, but does not lose that energy, that kinetic energy and elusiveness that he has with the ball in his hands, because it is fun. And I guess I always think it's weird using rookies in the breakout player segment, because I mean, the rookies, of course, like, there's nothing for them to break out of. They haven't played yet. So there's only one way for him to go, and that's up. But I think in terms of what Evans is, like, he's like the 3rd or 4th guy on the depth chart right now, but he was also really impressive in pass protection. He had like the majority of the pass blocking snaps out of the running backs. And I think that may mean something in the regular season when it comes to rotating Joe Mixon in and out of the game. I think if you have the choice between Evans and Samaje Perine, who I think you would trust Perine to run the ball like more with more security, albeit he did fumble in this preseason game. I think Evans comes into the conversation of a guy who can not only, catch balls out of the backfield, but also be a reliable pass protector. If he can continue to solidify that role for him, I think his projected playing time as a rookie is going to increase compared to what we thought it was going to be maybe a month ago. He really did make a statement to me on Saturday.
So again, the potential breakout players and how you want to label quote unquote breaking out is subjective. And if Chris Evans comes in here and is a niche guy on 3rd down, is a guy that becomes a nice little security blanket as a dump off option, a slot receiver option for Joe Burrow, on third downs, on critical passing downs. That's great for a guy that the team drafted on day 3, late in day 3. So Chris Evans, you also have to remember, John, a lot of people were saying, he needed to take different angles on his runs. And Brian Callahan, to your point, said, had a couple of public points of criticism for him. This kid only had 25 touches in college last year. So there's a little bit of rust to knock off there. There's a little bit of a higher adjustment curve because he didn't have a ton of touches last year. You go back to 2017, he had 135 rushing attempts and another 16 catches. So he was really utilized a lot more in prior years than he was this last year. 25 carries there, or 25 total touches there with the Wolverines last year. So, I mean, this is another one of those high potential. Let's see what we can get out of him. Let's ease him into a role here and see if we can make something work. But I think they've got a valuable weapon. They may need to go slow with it, limit the snaps, and make some just kind of have a few things that he does in order to make him comfortable in the offense. But I think there's a lot of athleticism there, and there's a lot of potential there to help out this offense and help it out really right away. You're muted.
Second leading receiver with 33 yards on 4 receptions as well. And we talked in the offseason about him being a natural receiver out of the backfield, a guy who can be moved out and aligned in the slot. So there's value in that. I think he was going to make the roster anyways, and he was probably going to be active on game days because of that versatility with him. It really is, though, like compared to just being a rookie, third, fourth string running back with minimal opportunities. You only see the field because of injuries potentially, and especially behind a running back who's projected to touch the ball damn near 300 times, I guess, this season. There's not a lot of immediate, hope for him being something significant, but it's interesting to imagine how they're going to divvy out these opportunities to these 3 running backs. And we haven't even talked about, we talked earlier about Jack Fitzpatrick, but his whole implication on the rotation as well. Like, they have 4 guys that, are probably going to make this team, and Patrick is hungry for opportunities, but I don't know if he's ahead of Evans right now. I think Evans probably has more value in the passing game, and that value is going to have him ahead of Patrick probably in the depth chart and probably out there on some of those important snaps. So again, this is Joe Mixon's show. Like, he's going to get the vast majority of snaps and touches and opportunities and everything, but I think in terms of what defines a breakout player, I think he is in the process of earning, I guess, a bigger role because of the things that he showed in Tampa Bay. He has to continue doing that against Washington and Miami, but right now things are looking good for him.
I agree. And one of the players I liked a lot in last year's draft was Antonio Gibson, a mid-round pick by the Washington football team, who we will see this week. But there are a little bit of some similarities in terms of the versatility factor with Chris Evans. Obviously not as high of a picker, as hyped up as Gibson was. Gibson had a nice rookie season as well, but there's some similarities there in the fact that you can maybe do some things as a wide receiver. You can do split them out a little bit, and then obviously run them out of the backfield, whether it's as a traditional runner or dump off passes, that sort of thing. And you just want, if he becomes a nice security blanket for Joe Burrow in some fashion there, I think that's going to be a nice move and a nice role for him to potentially become a breakout guy. Good stuff, John. Appreciate you contributing with the Chris Evans pick on our potential breakout players of 21. Let's get on out of here. Maybe some final thoughts. Of course, whatever else you would like to impart upon us, but maybe some things you're looking for and players you will be watching in week 2 as the Bengals go to Washington to take on the Washington football team.
I'm really interested to see how this defense kind of builds off that performance. Washington has athletes of its own on offense, and I assume Rivera is going to keep his starters out there for most, if not all, the first quarter. But, how they deal with Osai's injury, does that mean just more snaps for Sample, more snaps for Amani Bledsoe? Obviously, Darius Hodge is happy he's going to get more opportunities there. How does that rotation kind of get impacted with Osai's injury? Can they keep up that performance? Because Washington, again, has a pretty good offensive line, but they also have a rookie out there in Samuel Cosme. So, it'll be interesting to see how guys go up against him. But also a guy that we didn't really talk about today, Joe Bacci, a linebacker. He was like a third stringer right now, but I think on a couple of those plays in coverage, like he impacted at least one of those interceptions. I think he combined with Jalen Davis for one of the interceptions. So he could quietly convince this team to keep 6 linebackers instead of just 5. So it'd be interesting to see how he kind of performs as well. Larry Ogunjobi's coming back into this game. This is going to be his Bengals debut, so he's going to be starting. I want to see how he debuts. It's really going to be how this defense kind of builds off of that previous game. Yeah, there's only so much I guess we can expect from the offense with Brandon Allen still going to be out there for the entirety of the first half. So I guess it's just about how Jordan and Carmen continue to play in that battle. But really, my interest is on the defense and some of those guys that really stepped up last week. Can they keep that momentum, I guess, going for this week?
Yeah, going to definitely be focusing, at least for me, on the interior of the offensive line to see if that momentum carries, whether that's Deontay Smith, Mike Jordan, how the center position looks. All of that really intrigues me this week. And some of the lower guys on the depth chart at the wide receiver position and maybe even tight end. I know Thad Moss had a nice catch last week. I'm interested to see if he gets more time and more looks and if he is able to do something to get onto the roster. We talked about Trenton Irwin. Is he able to continue his momentum in the last preseason game and in recent practices, or is Trent Taylor going to do some things that start to have him leapfrog Irwin and some of those other wide receivers out there? I think, there's some intriguing options, of course, the running backs too, but while I'm interested in the defense, I do want to see Larry Ogunjobi play well in his debut. I'm interested in some of those skill positions on offense, some of the guys a little bit lower on the depth chart, how they do. I know it can be a mixed bag with some backup quarterbacks, third string quarterbacks, that sort of thing. But, I think some good showings from some of those guys will go a long way in helping them grab one of those last roster spots.
Trenton Irwin, Trent Taylor, even Scott Washington, like he was unfortunately targeted for like a dropped or one of those interceptions. Like they've got 9 of these guys. I'm assuming they're only going to keep at most 2 on the practice squad, and it looks like Irwin and Taylor have those spots kind of locked down. So how the rest of that position group kind of goes online, but Irwin and his freaking hair, man, like it's just fun watching him ball every time he gets a chance. But whether it be with Shermer or with Allen, I'm looking forward to see how he continues to perform.
Yep. Well, those will be some of the things we'll be looking at for week 2. We'll be having all coverage on CincyJungle.com. We'll be doing some more breakdowns on this show, whether it's the post-game show and obviously into some shows next week. We've got some special interviews coming down the road for you all on this program. I think you will enjoy that. So we're excited to bring that to you, as well as continued coverage with the team. Anything else before we bounce on out of here, John? Got to a ton tonight, dude.
We did get to a ton. I think I'm unfortunately all out of words, but Friday Night Football, man. We got Friday Night Football back in that. At the very least, I know it's in Washington, but at the very least, it's not the same field. They actually did replace that field, and I really hope that they burnt it so that field's now in hell, because it's taken the lives of too many careers in the NFL.
Yeah, not a good field there. And in case you did miss it, Joe Burrow will not be playing this week. It will be the backup quarterbacks. We don't know. Do you think Burrow plays in week 3, John? I know there are differing opinions whether he should or should not. You think he gets snaps in week 3?
I think he does get snaps. How many? Probably less than 5, and at least 4 of those are handoffs. But I do think that in as much of a controlled environment as you possibly can, it's at home. It's against the Dolphins. I don't think they're going to be that worried, at least compared to a Washington front 4 of Chase Young and Jonathan Allen and Montez Sweat. I think he does get some snaps, but it's not going to be anything that is more than just him being on the field.
Yeah. I'm in agreement with you. I think we see him week 3, but on a very, very extremely limited basis. Anyway, we'll talk about that as that news unfolds in the next week or so, but enjoy the game this weekend. As I said, we'll be bringing you all kinds of different coverage on the podcast channel, as well as on CincyJungle.com. For John Sheeran, I'm Anthony Cosenza. This has been the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. Thanks for joining us live. Thanks for joining us after the fact, whether it's on your favorite audio streamer or on YouTube. Subscribe to the Cincy Jungle podcast channel, and of course, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We appreciate the support, and we'll be talking to you soon. Take it easy.